Russian President Vladimir Putin is furious. A few months ago, he ordered a massive summer offensive that was supposed to see Russia steal huge swathes of territory away from Ukraine. That hasn't happened. Instead, Russia's forces are bogged down and failing to advance, and there's a clear reason why that's happening: Ukraine's drones. Ukraine's superior drone warfare is stopping the Russian offensive cold, as Ukraine has gone to the next level with its drone warfare capabilities. Russia's situation on the ground is far more dire than Putin would like the rest of the world to believe. The former commanding general of the US Army in Europe, Ben Hodges, made that point when speaking to Times Radio on July 30th. When asked about why Russia is relying so heavily on long-range drone and missile strikes of its own in 2025, Hodges had a simple answer. Well, obviously Russia is demonstrating that they don't have the ability to penetrate or overrun Ukrainian defenses in any sort of decisive way. Translation: Russia is using record numbers of long-range drones because Putin has realized that his forces on the ground are next to useless. We'll dig into that reliance in a moment. First, Hodges expands on the problems that Russia is facing on the ground. It's important to keep in mind that Russia is actually barely doing anything on the ground despite enormous losses, he says. And Hodges has a point. The numbers indicate that the Russian advance is more of a slow crawl than a systematic takeover of a country. 2025 in particular has been a bad year for Russia on the ground. That was highlighted in an April 10th Al Jazeera report, which shared figures from both the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, and the UK's Ministry of Defence, MOD. Both had come up with estimates covering how much territory Russia had managed to seize from Ukraine during the first 3 months of 2025. The ISW offered the more optimistic of the two pictures for Putin. According to its figures, Russia managed to take 165 square miles of Ukraine in January, followed by 137 square miles in February and just 78 square miles in March. You probably see a pattern here. The first 3 months of 2025 saw Russia's territorial gains decline to such low numbers to make them almost irrelevant in the context of the war. Remember that Ukraine is a sizable country measuring 233,100 square miles. Each month, Russia is taking a tiny fraction of a percentage of that territory while losing tens of thousands of soldiers to do it. And the losses are extensive, as Hodges pointed out. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, 1,053,260 Russian military personnel have been killed, injured, or captured up to July 31st. Russia regularly experiences 1,000 casualties or more per day, with July 30th alone bringing with it 1,070 losses. Take that into the context of the ISW's figures for a moment. Going with the March numbers, if Russia is losing about 1,000 soldiers per day, that makes 31,000 casualties for the month. In return, Russia gained 78 square miles. That amounts to 397 Russian troops lost for every square mile gained, which is a terrible return on investment. And that was the best-case scenario for Russia during the first 3 months of 2025. The MOD's figures were much worse. It said that Russia managed to take just 126 square miles of Ukraine in January, followed by 76 square miles in February and just 55 square miles in March. Regardless of which of the two institutions are correct, the story is the same for Russia: a whole lot of death for very little territorial return. Fast forward a few months and the picture hasn't gotten any better. In mid-July, the ISW estimated that Russia had advanced at an average pace of around 5.5 square miles per day during the first 6 months of 2025. Creating a monthly average of about 165 to 170 square miles. That indicates that Russia's troops are spread across the front line and are failing to focus on any specific area. Russian forces have largely relied on infantry to advance in Ukraine since Russia's initial push at the start of its full-scale invasion, the ISW adds, and Russian forces have failed to restore their ability to conduct the kind of mechanized maneuver that would enable more rapid Russian gains. The takeaway is simple: Russia's forces are stalling out. And nowhere is that clearer than in Povsk, a vital logistical hub for Ukraine located in the Donetsk region. Povsk is one of the main focuses of Putin's summer offensive. We know that thanks to the sheer number of troops he has dedicated to the region. CNN reports that there are 110,000 Russian soldiers in the vicinity of this small city, making Povsk the hottest spot on a front line that stretches for 745 miles. Putin wants Povsk, but despite dedicating so many troops to it, he still hasn't managed to take it. That's been the case for years, Hodges points out. And it's not like things will get much better for Russia if it does manage to topple Povsk. It's been over a year and a half and they've been trying to get this town of Povsk, which is in the far eastern part of Ukraine, and they still haven't been able to take it, Hodges says. And even after they do, then what? You know, there's another line of Ukrainian defenders. The point Hodges is making is that Russia's ground forces are mired in an attritional war that is offering very few major returns for the sheer number of soldiers and equipment it's losing. Povsk would be a big get for Putin, it's an important logistical hub, but it's far from a war ender. And Russia will only find itself locked into the near stalemate that it's faced in Ukraine after it takes Povsk. That puts Putin in a terrible position, as Hodges explains. So for Russia, their only real hope is that we quit, he says, referring to the West providing military aid and other support for Ukraine. Russia has to hope that we stop providing Ukraine with what it needs to stay in the fight, that we don't use the economic tools that we have, and that they wait us out. That doesn't seem likely to happen. And this refusal of the West to quit in Ukraine is what has led to Russia relying more heavily on something we mentioned earlier, long-range drone strikes. What they're doing is the only thing they can do, which is to attack, every night, Ukrainian cities and towns. They're not even pretending to go after industrial targets or power generation, Hodges points out. Hospitals, prisons, and civilian infrastructure are the targets of Russia's long-range drone strikes in a campaign Hodges says is designed to both wear down Ukrainian resolve and create this sort of sense of inevitability that there's no way they'll ever stop. The numbers back up Hodges' point. In July 2025, Russia's drone strikes against Ukraine increased by 1,378%, United 24 Media wrote on July 31st. A staggering 6,297 of Russia's Shahid and Gebara drones were sent into Ukraine in July 2025, compared to just 426 in July of the previous year. That's a clear indicator that Putin is relying on drones to do his damage. But therein lies a problem for Russia's leader. Long-range drones can't take territory. That's not a problem for Ukraine and its drone-based approach, as we'll get into in a moment, but for Russia, it's a major issue. Long-range drones can simply damage targets. When those targets are cities and civilian in nature, that damage isn't even helping the Russian soldiers on the front lines who are trying to advance. While Putin wants his drones to cause terror and wear down Ukraine, which is happening, he's not achieving the goal that he actually wants: complete Russian control over Ukraine. If anything, Russia's more intensive use of drones throughout 2025 is an indicator that Ukraine has managed to stall its enemy out on the ground. And that brings us to how Ukraine is doing all of this. Ukraine has stalled Russia out on the ground thanks to its far superior use of drones, tactically, strategically, and in terms of what the damage it's doing with its drones ultimately means for the war. And to expand on that point, we turn to former pilot in the UK's Royal Air Force, Air Vice Marshal Sean Bell. Like Hodges, Bell spoke to Times Radio on July 30th. To deliver his opinions on what he sees in the Ukraine war, and he starts by pointing out that Ukraine has avoided engaging in the type of war that Putin wanted to fight ever since the war began. Ukraine is a battle between David and Goliath, Bell says. Ukraine has about 37 million population. I think Russia is about 5 times the size. Ukraine has got sort of older, less capable Soviet kit, and Russia would have fully expected to just roll over Ukraine. Amazingly, Ukraine survived. And over the last few years, gradually, the West has stepped up to support. But at its heart, what Ukraine has to avoid is a mass-on-mass fight. That last statement is the most important because that avoidance is precisely what Ukraine has been doing to stall out Russia. If Ukraine had just fought Russia head-on, the war wouldn't have lasted the 3.5 years it has so far. Russia would win that fight, even with the West providing support to Ukraine. As Bell points out, Russia has a lot more firepower. Global Firepower says that its active military has 1.32 million members compared to Ukraine's 900,000. That may not seem like a massive difference maker, but the problem for Ukraine comes in the other manpower numbers. Russia has 800,000 more reserves than Ukraine can field. It also has about 875,000 more people reaching military age per year, along with 33.45 million people who are fit for military service. In a mass-on-mass war, Russia wins. So Ukraine went a different way. One of the great things they've done is they've started to exploit unmanned aerial vehicles, drones particularly. Lightweight, small, Bell says. And inside Ukraine itself, those drones are wreaking havoc on Russia's soldiers. And I think for me, the big statistic is that in World War I and World War II, most of the battlefield injuries were caused by artillery shells, whereas at the moment, over 80% of the battlefield injuries have been caused by drones. This has been widely reported. April saw Army Technology share the same figure, while also noting that Russia is losing about 1,000 soldiers daily, as we mentioned earlier. This means that 800 of Russia's daily casualties are a result of those troops coming into contact not with Ukrainian soldiers or more traditional types of war equipment, but because drones find and kill them. What we see here is Ukraine's avoidance of mass-on-mass fighting in action, and Ukraine knows precisely what it's doing with its drone approach. In March, Forbes reported that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had set a target for his country to build 4.5 million drones in 2025. That would give Ukraine more than 4 times the number of drones than it has active members of its military, which hints at Ukraine trying to move toward a version of warfare where it rarely has to put humans in the firing line. Drones are doing all of Ukraine's hard work, and they're the reason why Russia's ground troops are failing to advance. Ukraine's drones kill people and destroy mechanized equipment, which are the two key assets Putin needs to have if Russia is to take territory. And because Ukraine is using short-range drones to counter Russia's sheer numbers, it's opening up opportunities to retake territory as well. A drone offensive can be followed up by soldiers claiming land Russia previously occupied, which is far different from what we're seeing with Russia's long-range drone strikes. Of course, Russia has drones inside Ukraine too, but it has to deal with supply chain challenges to get those drones into the country, meaning Ukraine is always a step ahead in terms of numbers. Plus, Ukraine simply knows how to use its drones better than Russia. We see an example of this from a new Ukrainian tactic: drone buffer zones. Those new zones are playing a huge role in stalling Russia's troops. And the headline, of course, is that despite Russia's mass, despite Russia being on the front foot, Ukraine has effectively halted Russia in its tracks, largely because there's a huge buffer zone now where if you move, you die, and it's all around drones, Bell tells Times Radio. The traditional front lines have been transformed by these buffer zones. In the past, a combination of the range of direct fire weapons and the effectiveness of indirect fire weapons determined the rate of advance or retreat. Now that isn't the case. The drone buffer zones are in play and they're limiting the effectiveness of Russia's tanks and artillery enormously. Ukraine started building this buffer zone, which could also be considered a drone wall, back in March. In that month, Euromaidan Press reported that Ukraine was planning a 9.3-mile buffer zone amid its daily drone production reaching 4,000 units. Inside FPV referred to this new tactic as a potential game-changer in the war, as it showed Ukraine was taking the initiative in shifting toward a drone-monitored and controlled battlefield that would allow it to control Russia's manpower advantage. By May, Ukraine was pushing to set up even more of these drone buffer zones, according to CNN. The idea by that point was to create multiple defensive corridors across the front line around the areas into which Russia wanted to take during its summer offensive. It's a simple concept. Ukraine creates its drone corridors to make it impossible for Russia to take the most direct route to its targets. These no-go corridors are used to funnel Russia's soldiers into open spaces where they can be assaulted using drones, artillery, and any other weapons Ukraine happens to have. Ukraine has also created something called the Otchi, Reuters reported on July 17th. That system centralizes the video feeds being captured by the drones operated by 15,000 crews throughout Ukraine, offering immense battlefield visibility. Ukraine can see where Russia's soldiers are and where they want to attack, allowing it to prepare defenses and set up ambushes, all of which lead to more Russian losses. And coming back to Bell's point, all of this helps Ukraine to avoid the mass-on-mass battle that Putin really wants. But it's not just the drone campaign on the battlefield that has seen Ukraine level up. Ukraine is also using its drones to cause serious damage to Russia on its own territory. Operation Spiderweb offers the perfect example. This brilliant strike saw Ukraine sneak dozens of first-person view drones into Russia using trucks and special containers that concealed them from view. Those trucks went to warehouses that Ukraine had purchased before being driven out by Russian drivers who had no idea what they contained. The trucks stopped at pre-designated points, their containers opened, and hordes of Ukrainian drones poured out to attack 4 key Russian airfields. By the end of the strike, Ukraine had destroyed several Russian bombers and spy planes, costing the country about $7 billion in the process. You can find out more about Operation Spiderweb and the impact it had on Russia in our video. Bell brings up this strike on Times Radio. Operation Spiderweb was bad for Russia because the aircraft Ukraine targeted were among the few serviceable bombers and spy planes that Putin had purposely flown to locations he thought were out of range of Ukraine's strikes. As you well know, Russia is famous for cannibalizing its aircraft, Bell points out. So the proportion of the fleet that was actually flown away that were serviceable was most of them, and a good number of those were taken out in the operation. And Operation Spiderweb was just one of the many drone-based assaults Ukraine has conducted on Russian territory. The Ukrainians are being much more surgical with their very long-range drones, Bell points out. And not just Operation Spiderweb. Ukraine is flying drones from over 1,000 kilometers away to strike critical military infrastructure, logistics infrastructure, factories, oil refineries, and all the rest of it. And it's working. In February, the Atlantic Council reported that Ukraine's long-range drones had destroyed about 10% of Russia's oil refining capacity. By the end of June, the Kyiv Independent was reporting that deep drone strikes had cost Russia more than $10 billion in 2025 alone. And that's the point. While Ukraine uses its short-range FPV drones to stall Russia's troops on the front lines, its long-range drones are hitting the very infrastructure that keeps those troops supplied. Fuel is going up in flames, ammunition storage units and manufacturing facilities are being taken out. With each of these losses, another cog in the Russian war machine is destroyed. Putin's troops on the front get weaker as Ukraine is building up its drone army, which all contributes to Russia's glacial pace of advance. This brilliant drone strategy creates a static front-line problem for Putin, and that stalemate situation is also making Russia's other weapons less effective. Take guided aerial bombs as an example. also known as glide bombs thanks to the special kits used to create them, which equipped Soviet-era dumb bombs with wings that allow them to glide to their target. Guided aerial bombs were a huge part of Putin's 2024 strategy. Reuters reports that Russia launched 51,000 of them at Ukraine in 2024 alone, causing devastation and aiding Putin's troops. Now Bell says those bombs are less effective thanks to Ukraine using its drones to stop Russia in its tracks. But of course, because the front lines got so static of late that all the Ukrainians are down in their bunkers, yes, glide bombs are causing them a bit of a headache and their eardrums are ringing for a few moments, Bell says. But in the early days, it was really damaging. As the front line gets more static because of the drones that are creating this buffer zone, the glide bombs are not so effective. Ukraine's drones are preventing Russia from using its glide bombs just as they're preventing Putin's ground forces from taking territory. Finally, there's one more aspect to consider in Ukraine's drone strategy. The sheer social pressure being placed on Putin by Ukraine conducting so many successful deep strikes in Russian territory is a major problem. Every successful strike is another sign to Russia's people that Putin isn't the great protector that he claims to be. Putin isn't going to stop just because Ukraine is hitting Russia with drones, but he does become less effective as a leader because Russia's people can no longer trust the image of the strongman that Putin has crafted. After all, how could Putin be so strong if he's allowing Ukraine to use drones to bring the war back to Russia? This combination of battlefield and long-range tactics is what really takes Ukraine's drone-based approach to the next level. There is purpose in everything that Ukraine does. It builds massive numbers of drones not just to get a mass advantage against Russia, but because it knows how to use those drones to create buffer zones, destroy Russian troops, and hit key military infrastructure. If Ukraine is to win this war, its drones will be the key, and all Putin can do is watch as his troops get shut down by Ukraine's brilliant tactics. And drones aren't just helping Ukraine to stop Russia's advances. These unmanned aerial vehicles may be the key to turning Ukraine into a military superpower that could rival or even surpass Russia. Find out more in our video and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more videos covering Ukraine's ever-evolving tactics. And thank you as always for watching.